Warhammer Quest II: The End Times promises a sequel to the popular first title, which was released a few years back. Initially released on mobile devices and now ported to the Nintendo Switch, I found it both refreshing and frustrating in equal measure. Why? Let's find out. Unlike the first game, where there wasn't much of a story, the sequel tries to rectify this by making the story clear at the beginning. You'll initially take control of two warring species who are united in their quest to save the world. To do this, you're searching for a particular relic and a weapon of great power, which sounds very familiar if you've ever played or watched any fantasy game ever. Story exposition plays out almost like a choose-your-own-adventure storybook, which I really enjoyed. However, immediately I noticed how small the text was with which the story was being delivered, and when you're having to squint at a small screen, particularly in handheld, with no option to increase the size of the font. Perhaps a reflection of its mobile roots, the story aspects were kept brief, and actually this worked well. They're only delivered during a loading screen, so you have a small chance to read, and then the game's generally loaded. You won't find a multitude of side quests here. It's actually really linear, despite looking like you have an open world map. You're on rails of sorts. However, sometimes random events will take place when you're traveling from A to B, and you have the option of interacting with these or ignoring them. Depending on the abilities of your party, sometimes you can gain extra rewards based on the statistics that your characters have, with some of the more tricky optional missions allowing you to rescue and get new members to your party. There are 3 large areas in the game and they're split into acts. I think there's around 10 acts per area. In this regard, I felt the story pacing worked well, and you never get that confusing moment where you just don't know what's going on or what to do next. Just don't expect the off the beaten path questing here, because it's not really part of this game. Now, in terms of the core gameplay, this is a turn-based strategy experience that primarily takes place from a top-down view. Now, what I noticed is that with the touch screen controls, it was much more responsive. You could pinch to zoom, twist to span the camera, and touch individual characters. However, when you're using the Joy-Cons, it just did not work quite the same. There were a number of quirks, like having to exit out of the current menu you're in before you could adjust the camera, whereas in handheld and touch mode, you could just touch whatever you wanted to touch and pinch to zoom whenever you needed. Add into this the unfortunate bugs that I hit. There were a few times where in docked mode, a button just wouldn't respond, and I found that undocking the console and using the touch would fix the issue. Otherwise, I'd have to restart the game. The core gameplay then sees you controlling these 4 warriors, of which many more classes are available throughout the taverns of the world, but we'll cover those in a moment. Each character has a number of AP or action points, allowing them to move. Each grid section on the floor represents 1 AP, and dependent on the weapon you're wielding, you're shown the AP beside it. Dungeon encounters are where most of your gameplay will take place, with each being an interconnected series of rooms. When opening a door, all the enemies within will become visible, and they'll do their darndest to separate you from your life. My first impressions of this system were that it's very typical, but it worked well enough. But unfortunately, I found the game just a little bit too easy. Once you'd got a few ranged units in your party, it was simple enough to just backtrack and shoot and cheese the enemies to whittle down their numbers before advancing forward with your melee units. The artificial intelligence doesn't do much to help this, particularly when there's no difficulty mode. The standard difficulty will have enemies just move slowly towards you. If they're completely outnumbered, they may back away, but 9 times out of 10 you can just wait around a corner until they show themselves with no AP, and you can use your turn to wail on them. What makes the game a touch more interesting are the number of weapons that you can collect. Now, you don't get these in the game, you get them at the end of each round, with 3 cards shown and turned, giving you a random item or perk. I did enjoy this system, and to be honest, it is thrilling when you unlock a super rare item to be used with one of your characters. However, the thrill wears off when you remember that you were winning already very easily with the default weapons. I mentioned early on that the controls were much better in handheld, and I cannot state just how much of a difference that makes to your gameplay. I found that it was really quite a pleasant experience, just sat with the Switch on my lap playing with touch screen, but then when switching to those docked Joy-Con controllers, it just feels clunky. At the end of each dungeon area, which generally has its own quest attached, you're given a small amount of dialogue, which will generally lead to a boss encounter of sorts with a much tougher enemy. Again though, these tougher enemies, in air quotes, are boiled down to having a slightly larger health bar, which felt like a missed opportunity, particularly alongside titles like Diablo with their massive boss fight encounters. It's important here to state that I don't dislike the combat here. It just feels lacking when you compare it to games like XCOM, Wasteland 2, or even the recent Spaceland on Switch. There's no item pickups in the world. Between dungeons, there are a few more interesting aspects. The towns I enjoyed, with their small nod to Game of Thrones as they pop up from the ground, and within each of these you'll find a tavern and a shop. The tavern allows you to recruit new units to your party for a small chunk of gold, and is also where you can sell those you don't wish to continue with. The shop allows for the purchase of new gear and equipment for your party. However, it would have been nice to see what's currently equipped on your party so that you can do some kind of comparison, or at least for it to show you with an arrow whether these were more or less powerful. In addition to weapons, you can also buy skill cards here. These may be passive or active, with the active ones costing AP during a fight, but due to the random nature of your loot drops, you may find you can't actually afford anything for quite some time. Within towns, you'll also be leveling up your characters, and this will cost you gold, 100 to be precise. And it just didn't feel like you were shown what difference this made when you did it. In fact, leveling in general just wasn't given any fanfare. We're so used to bells and whistles going off when you level up. Here, absolutely nothing shown apart from very, very small text than the current required amount for the next level. One element that I absolutely loved was the ability to change the names of every single character in your party, with some limited options in there to change the color theme, as well as all the gear they're currently carrying. Overall, it might have sounded like I didn't like the title, but I did. It was fun enough, but it does get repetitive, and it does feel like you have a limited impact on the world. If there had been some more choice in the route that you take, and had things like an increased difficulty option, for example, it would have made the world of difference. As it is, I enjoyed the 3 areas. They look nice enough, and the saving grace for me was the story delivery, but the core gameplay, although fun and enjoyable, just isn't challenging or rewarding enough, and the 3 bugs that I've already hit show a lack of polish. Gameplay for me scores 13 out of 20. In terms of the controls, the docked controls are okay. They're a little clunky, whereas the handheld controls are excellent, absolutely great. Overall then, I'd say controls score 15 out of 20. With its Tolkien-esque visuals and high fantasy world, I thought the visuals look really nice in this game. Particularly the world map looks lovely. When in dungeons, everything's running at a fluid 60 frames per second, and the miserable worn, torn environments look suitably fitting. The character models themselves aren't quite up to the same standard, however, which is particularly evident upon the character selection screen. The models look a touch low res against the stark white backdrops, and I would have liked a more frequent visual customization of these as you progress in your story. In a high fantasy title, I expect for my retinas to be seared by on-screen special effects and spells exploding in all directions, but everything here is quite muted. Frustratingly, I really like the musical track of the game. However, it is repeated so much that in the end I just had to turn it down. And there's one track which is disproportionately loud to the rest of the game music and was really quite jarring. The sound effects are okay, they all do their job. And there's around about 25 different enemies to defeat. Overall then, I loved the visual style of the game. I thought it worked well, it was simplistic, and the isometric shifting of the camera in handheld works really nicely. I would have liked more refinement in terms of character customization, and they need to do something about the overly small font. Still, visuals for the most part are nice, and they score 15 out of 20. Some of the music in the game is lovely, but I didn't feel there was enough variety. And it's a shame they didn't have a narrator, as some of that text is just so small. Audio scores 12 out of 20. In terms of value then, I'll be honest with you, I find this a little bit frustrating. The game costs £27.99, €29.99 or $29.99, and it plays out best in handheld mode using the touch screen, which is interesting because I thought I'd go and have a little look at the iOS version of the title, which currently costs £4.99. But here at Switch Up, we try to be fair, so I headed over to Steam. They currently have the first and second games bundled together for £21, or you can buy this one for £19. If this game was £5 like it is on iOS, my goodness, it would definitely be a recommendation. There is a lot of fun to be had in this more simplified real-time strategy, but at £27.99, no thanks. No, not for me, not for my money. I would say at maybe a 50% sale, this would be a pickup. Here though, I give value 5 out of 20. So there we have it, another game that is susceptible to the Switch tax and from the Warhammer series. A very fun title in small doses, but it gets repetitive, and unfortunately there were a number of smaller bugs. A big thanks to the developers for the review copy. Warhammer Quest 2 gets a Switch Up score of 60%. A big thanks to our patrons and all of you who support us each and every month for all things Switch all the time. Keep it Switch Up. Cheers guys, see ya!